Good day to each one of you, my 258 participants. Welcome to the last day of GGG 2021. And I'm so grateful to each one of you for being there, for giving organizers the energy, for telling us that we all can together make a difference to geography, geographers, and geospatial ecosystem. Thank you very much. I welcome Dr. Tapti Banerjee, Dr. Rituparna Bhattacharya, Dr. Gaurav Sikka, Dr. Karuna Shiri, and here I am, Seema Mehra Parihar, convener of your course, welcoming each one of you. I'm so happy that today Dr. Tapti Banerjee, who is also a co-convener of this particular refresher course, and has also got so many feathers in her cap. She's the first women director of NATMO, National Atlas and Thematic Map Organization, Kolkata. And she became this director from 9th November 2016. And she's continuing with all accolades to her credit. She has acquired a postgraduate degree in geography. She's like a geographer like you and me. And her professional journey started in mapping of physiographic units, landform, land use, and their correlation in spatial distribution of different soil types for blocks, watershed and farm level planning, state level soil resource mapping in West Bengal, Bihar, Odisha, and Jharkhand. That goes to her credit. She has generated thematic map based on point and polygon data. She's also developed decision support system using geospatial tools and for generation of thematic maps, identification and delineation of crop pest and disease using satellite data and auxiliary data, preparation of map and the spatial distribution, analysis for recommendation of integrated pest management, and cartographic appraisal by combining scientific and aesthetic elements with specialized knowledge of compilation and design principles. Geographer who is actually making a difference. In addition to these responsibilities, Dr. Banerjee also was a project investigator for 5 research projects. And I've got 28 research projects, including 4 externally funded projects. And each project is the one where she has made a mark. And she's also, got a lot of collaborating thing. Even I am collaborating at present with her on a Women Empowerment Atlas of India Science and Technology perspective, and I'm learning so much from ma'am. And besides this, she's a life member of many academic professional associations like Asian Agri-History, INCA, ILLE, Soil Conservation, and so on and so forth. And I would just like to also share with you that last year she was the president of INCA, and she hosted a wonderful conference even during pandemic, and with so many people who were there. And she's going to talk today about geography, GIS, and geospatial thinking. She's going to take you forward. She's going to tell you that there is so much more to do. And you all can, through your geospatial thinking, can make a difference. Thank you, Dr. Tapti. And here we have Dr. Rituparna Bhattacharya. She's going to talk to us today about transition and sustainable living. She was talking about geospatial thinking. Rituparna is talking about sustainable living. And the reason, why I'm putting these people on the last day, just, before you are leaving at the end of the course, that you all should join hands with these people and say, yes, I, of course, have geospatial thinking and I would be using it for sustainable living. Rituparna Bhattacharya holds a PhD from the School of Geography, Politics and Sociology, University of Newcastle, UK. She's a senior fellowship, and at UK. And in 2018, she became an associate fellow from the same accrediting body of higher education, that is Advanced Higher Education, UK. So Rituparna works as a research consultant and editor-in-chief, Journal Space and Culture India, and she renders volunteering services at Prague Foundation for Capacity Building, a public charitable trust of India, and Alliance for Community Capacity Building in Northeast India, a UK registered charity. Thank you, Rituparna, for finding time for sending me a recording. And I'm genuinely grateful. And she has over 60 publications. And she's like to tell you all that you all have to promise to make a difference to this earth. She's going to talk today about transition and the sustainable living. And she's going to give you a lot of information from the present climate change summit, where India has pledged to accomplish carbon neutrality by 2070. She further ponders over on the question, how will it be accomplished? What are the transitional plans through which India aims to achieve a net zero carbon footprint? This lecture will first discuss the notion of just transition, and it will then discuss how the notion gained momentum and was incorporated in the Paris Agreement of 2015. Then it will discuss the social, economic, and political challenges that will need to be met for just transition to take place at different interconnected domains of the economy. And following him would be young, dynamic person to whom you all can relate. Most of you can relate, and that is Gaurav Sikka. He's so young, he's so bright, he's so dynamic. And his experiences of outreach as an early career geographer is something, which you will all, just the fag in, you will get that energy from this young geographer. And Gaurav PhD was just as recent as 2018, just 2 years before this. And of course, he's just note this, his awards and achievements. I just want, just to know the boy who was just done his PhD from just 2 years back. He was elected as Secretary and Treasurer of IGU, Task Force for Young and Early Career Geographer, in June 2017 till date. And he was selected as member Course Steering Committee in newly established International Geographical Union Task Force for Young and Early Career Geographers. He was also elected as member in Executive Committee of Gender and Feminist Geographies Research Group of Royal Geography Society. He also received full cover grant from University of Manchester as an excellent scholar for the Global South to present paper in Development Studies, Association Annual Conference, Manchester, UK. So on and so forth, travel grant for Russia, travel grant for China. So he's just knowing how to go about it. And even his publications, he's got his publications in H-Index and in great books, great research journals. Gaurav, we are very proud of you. I am very proud of you. And I'm actually very fond of you also. Thank you. In such a short span, you could give me that short, brief video of yours to motivate everybody. That's it. If Gaurav can do it, you all can definitely do it. And in the end of this conference, in the end of this refresher course, which is a conference of all these faculty members, 258, I thought you should not leave this particular course without understanding the relevance of mental health. COVID pandemic has definitely told us that mental health is very important. And here I have a young colleague of mine, smart, confident, cheerful, and always ready to help students, Karuna Shire at Kironimal College, Department of Geography. Karuna is going to share with you about mental health and how our department is making a difference by talking with students and by talking with teachers, interpersonal issues, interpersonal concerns. And she, I know, is passionate about it. And I'm so grateful that she's part of my department, as I'm grateful of my other colleagues. Till now, you all have met, Arun, you met on the first day. You met Khusro yesterday, who was making QGIS easy for you. And here there is Karuna to tell you about the mental health issues. So my request to each one of you is, please do not ignore the other things, which I shared with you, even in my empowering mantra. So that's something which is so very important. And today is a special day when I know you all are going to promise me that we are going to make a difference. We are going to work towards it. And we are definitely assuring you, ma'am, that we all would make use of all those technologies, all those research methodologies, let it be qualitative methods, let it be, quantitative data you're fond of or not, but today there are a lot many problems. And you all, what I shared with you in my 5G mantra, you all would definitely promise me, ma'am, we would do self-management in secret. E, you all would definitely empower yourself in terms of effort management. C, company management. All those contexts and all those, you will also solve those conflicts, and the content you all would draw so that, that company management becomes good. R, for relationship management, you will create right association with geography, geographers, with data and all that, without a bias. And all this you will do in the framework of emotional management, which is so very important. And T is teamwork. T is you will take care of the time. You will do your priority management well. As Professor R.B. Singh, to whom this course is dedicated, he is the one who has, in a short span of life, managed all this. That's the reason why his daughter was here, his students are here. And just before I end my, this thing and get going with all these, I just want to tell you a page from his dynamic students. One day I called Pankaj and I said, Pankaj, why don't you give a presentation? He's just come from somewhere, finishing his family responsibility. And he told me, ma'am, I have a BRICS meeting in which he's there, a part of that project. And tomorrow I'm going to Rome because I have a meeting with IGU. And that's what our Professor R.B. Singh student. And Dr. Pandey, I know, is always busy doing something. Dr. Subhash is busy doing something else. And daughter, she told me that, ma'am, I just wish that this year, in this lifespan, my papa was Ram Babu, Ram. Next, I hope that my papa would be Krishna. She was visualizing in that space-time framework, in one where Professor R.B. Singh was, Maryada Purushottam, where he made a difference to geography discipline across geographies. And next he would be Krishna, who is one example of Aishwarya. I wish you all luck. I wish you all Aishwarya. I wish you all take your journey forward. And definitely after 2025 and 2030 and the years ahead, you all would make new geographies. You all will introduce new branches in geography, and you all would always remember that space and time in geography is important. Yes, here we have these smart people talking to you today. Thank you, Tapti ma'am, and Rituparna, and Gaurav, and Karuna. Thank you very much for being here. And thank you, dear participants. I'll miss you all. I'll miss you all, definitely. But we'll meet in the valedictory program.
Namaskar. First of all, I welcome all the listeners and participants on the 2-week refresher course on geography, geographers, and geospatial technologies impacting physical, social, and gender spaces 2021. In this perspective, my theme of deliberation will be based on geography, GIS, that is Geographic Information System, and geospatial thinking, changes over the period. Let me introduce first myself. Presently, I am looking after NATMO, that is National Atlas and Thematic Mapping Organization, working under Ministry of Science and Technology, Government of India. Before that, I was involved in research activities in different institutes under Indian Council of Agricultural Research. Now, let us first start with geography. We all know that the term geography was coined by Eratosthenes. The subject that describes the earth where all living beings have their home. So, geography describes the Earth's pattern and environment and its relation with the living being. So, definitely, it studies in multidisciplinary deals with different disciplines. Some basic concepts we can refer over here while working on while discussing on this subject, which is associated with some concepts, basic concepts. These are, first of all, this include that place means a specific position on the earth's surface which we are occupying, that is a location. Next comes the space. Similarly, almost similar to place, that is the position in terms of distance from one another, that is also a specifically location specific. Then comes environment. All types of phenomena that encompasses a living and non-living things and their relation with both their physical and living perspective, that we used to call as interconnection. And under this concept comes the point of sustainability, that to meet the needs of all to endure in a relatively ongoing across the various domains of life. Here, the level of interaction or the interaction is most important, which we used to refer as skill, and that covers over the period of time that we call as change, time and space that we call refer as change. So first I just want to touch upon that how geography came into action. At first, it was started with that geography, Greek word geographia, where G means earth and graphia means writing or studying, that first introduced by the Greek. From there, the Latin word geographia or that French word geography has been transformed, introduced by them. And later, in the later period of 15th century, that has given us that proper terminology of geography, which is still continuing as a subject or discipline, you can say. Then, how the perception of art and the subject geography has changed over the time period. If we see the classical period, Pythagoras, we all know about him, a great philosopher, mathematician who first informed about the shape of earth and its movement around the sun. Then, Greek historian Herodotus, known as father of history, being historian, Herodotus explained and observed and explained about physical geography, where he has explained that the deposition, silt deposition of Nile Delta. Afterwards, we can refer the name of Greek philosopher Aristotle, all you know, who explained the eclipses. We can cite here the name of mathematician, also a poet, Eratosthenes, who observed the angle of sun. Then Hipparchus, Greek astronomer studied that sun and other stars. Then locational aspect of art was explained. Detail explanation has been done by him, by the cartographer Ptolemy, who evolved actually the science of map making. Now, if we come to the modern period of geographical perception or geographical concept, first comes the name of Bernhardus Varenius, who first recognized the organizations to discuss or work on geographical knowledge, on geographical discipline, geographical work, research. He published several books on it, and where the geography was very general and with that special perspective on regional aspect, where as well as the interaction between the human and environmental process. Then we can refer the name of Immanuel Kant. Being a philosopher, he tried to find out the foundation of geography within the framework of other sciences. Then we must refer the name of Alexander von Humboldt, a German scientist, tried to mold geography as a scientific study. He is the man who invented isotherm to compare temperature, which we still today we are using this isotherm to depict the temperature condition over the space. Karl Ritter, again a German geographer, who tried to develop a holistic approach by including all sciences in the study of geography and the interrelated complex of elements. The role of geographers, we should refer here, uh, and we should refer the name of Ellsworth Huntington, particularly regarding his study on the effect of climate on human beings, especially on their human heredity and civilization. His concept, his study was known as determinism, in which physical environment was referred as the active agent, while the human environment as passive agent. Although this theory of determinism was opposed by Vedal de la Blanche, and his theory was popularized as possibilism, that is, maybe or may not be. Then, reflection of imagination of human being can refer over here, which ultimately helped us to develop the concept of mapping. In the early historic period, human beings who were used to live in the cave, they used to paint the walls, cave walls, about the real world, what they used to imagine or what they used to see. This actually replicated on the depiction of art space through maps. The map actually, which is the depiction of 3D formation of a surface onto a plane of paper that is 2D surface. In this regard, we should refer the name of Ptolemy who prepared the world map. Then Al-Idrisi enhanced the geographical concept with the natural, cultural, socio-economic and other aspects. And during medieval period, a generic term, Mappa Mundi, which was drawn in a much elaborative manner. Later on, a marketer map was notable. We can refer his name and marketer projection. Using the marketer projection, he introduced that in this aspect, which is till date we use that one. So now come that how the mapping introduced in India. Some early references we can refer over here about Sushan Gole, who commented on cartographic tradition on early India that though not numerous, a number of map like graffiti appears among the thousands of Stone Age Indian cave paintings, and at least one complex Mesolithic diagram is believed to a representation of the cosmos. Later on, Joseph Strasberg remarked that the Bronze Age of Indian Indus Valley civilization may have known for cartographic activity based on discussion of cartographic instruments and materials during excavation. During that period, cartography was used to depict India as legendary painting with poetic form of description, though through wall painting and other types of painting. And the evidence is still it is we can see in Kashmir the paintings of Mughal period, it is kept over there. Finally, we can refer the trigonometric survey conducted by Survey of India, that is Great Arc Project, to measure the distances and height of that physical phenomena, that is mountains, Everest, especially the height of Everest. In this respect, I must refer the name of James Rennill, who vigorously surveyed, the British surveyor who rigorously surveyed the eastern region, especially the Bengal region, for mapping of this part of the country. Then Survey of India, they completed the surveying and mapping, that is, they produced the topographical maps for whole of India. And in during this period, the cartography, especially that later on after Survey of India, there's different other organization like National Atlas and Thematic Mapping Organization, Geological Survey of India. They started mapping on thematic perspective with covering different subjects, theme or themes. In early period, we can refer over here that in early period of modern age, early part of modern age, emphasis was mainly given on the principles of cartography, especially the projection system allometer, that azimuth. Here, I must cite the name of Arthur Robinson, who dedicated his career in projection system to depict 3D Earth surface onto a 2D plane of surface to maintain its position azimuth, along and also shape pattern everything of the countries depicted over the earth, as we see over the earth. Along with this scientific idea, aesthetic concept was also considered for visualization aspect, considering the visualization aspect. Gradually, this analytical cartography was developed, where systems of transformation were set out during later part of 20th century. Afterwards, with the advancement of technology, map making idea has changed from completely from manual system to the digital one. That can be referred as the era of technology, which was basically propounded by Rudolf Tobler, known as for his idea was known as first law of geography, where he refers that everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. During his time, this transformation of mapping technology was adopted with the geometric logic rules, where emphasis were given on three major components or basic components, that is, points, line, and polygons. In this rule, points are considered as location, and when these points are joined, then then the concept of lines arises, develops, and which are used for developing that roads, lines, roads, lines for or the other communication system. And if we join another lines and make it close it these lines, then develops that polygon, which we which feature the feature that we used to develop create a area polygon to make the boundary, that is to showcase that water body, etc. So this is the basic concept or basic components of that geography. So, with this concept, the idea of that new technology arrived, that which we used to say as that GIS or Geographic Information System, which modern cartography invited, especially after that technological evaluation in 20th century. And this concept of modern cartography or digital cartography with the attribute data that has been popularized as Geographic Information System or GIS. here the name of Jack Dangermond, CEO of ISRI, Environmental System Research Institute, we can refer over here, who remarked on that application of GIS that the application is of GIS is limited only by the imagination of those who use in the GIS system. So here, actually, when we talk of GIS, location is considered as the most important aspect. Where GIS basically it is the framework that provides that are used to visualize, analyze, replicate, and represent the art formation. And this always gives the one-stop solution for everything we search for as a part of question of geography. And here some of the points always comes in by some questions that arises out of that, where we are basically, that is that ask about the location, which part of the earth or which position you need to work on or you need to study, and why we are here to justify, that is to justify our position, and what you want, what you are going to do with the space. And finally comes that how will you do or complete your task. And that these here all information all these are considered in geospatial perspective, that is locational perspective, to find out the solution of every problem. Here all information of a particular place are stacked layer wise for analysis to solve of the problem. Actually, when we talk about geo information, that there comes the points of like the use of different tools that which we used to call as geospatial technology. Here, first comes that remote sensing technology that collects information from the remote area about the earth surface. Then comes that land surface, which we can directly use to collect information from the ground, and that GPS, global positioning system, which help us to verify the interpreted information of the remotely sensed data with the ground coverage. And all these information are compiled in the computer system digital system to make it digital information that help to develop the information system of that particular place of the work. As I told you earlier, that these all these information are used layer wise in the GIS platform. As all we know that GIS extracts, stores, and process the information in a much systematic manner, which we can analyze and transform into a more structured way. And that way, this way it helps to assist the natural resource management practices with more and more informative data. So thus the GIS, it empowers the scientists and technologists with in a different way. That is, first of all, maximum use the existing information, and to collect it, it reduces the cost as well as that burden, and it gives more transparency and accountability, and there is a possibility to enhance by monitoring on the ground and better data set management and research work. Then later part, that GIS again has been transformed with into GI science, especially by Goodchild, who coined this term, and he stated that a geographical information system can be defined in a computer system. Actually, in this perspective, just want to share that when we talk about GIS, it basically gives that this concept is limited with hardware software part only, and this has been changed by Goodchild, who referred that this is basically a computer system for performing virtually any conceivable operation on geographical data, from acquisition and compilation through display analysis and modeling to sharing and archiving. The defining characteristics of a GIS is that all facts represented in the system are tied into the earth surface. In other words, all contents of a GIS is ultimately reducible to statements in the form of X and Y, where X is the X and Z. Actually, in this perspective, I just want to mention that X is the location in geographical space, and that is extendable for 4 dimension if time is included. And Z is a set of characteristics or properties that exist at that location. So here we can mention the three pillars of GI science. The first is that, and that has been possible with that technological advancement, and which taking us from geospatial information system and focusing towards the business perspective. Here three pillars, basically the geographic or geospatial pillar, though that is that we can consider it as the first pillar. Here the spatial information will be observed, measured, analyzed and represented by collecting information or data through surveying, photogrammetry, remote sensing, and understanding and relation between the physical and human geography. And finally, digital cartography will help in the spatial visualization. Then comes that information science, and that deal with the logical structuring of information, assessment of data quality, and integrating data from different sources for effective and skillful use of spatial information through spatial indexing, computational geometry, that for user making it user interface designing. Then comes the third pillar, which nowadays is most important because now GI professionals have to know and understand the user's need to satisfy them, which we refer as the e-commerce. And this part is very complicated as this procedure is very case sensitive in terms of legal perspective, privacy, copyright perspective, and security perspective. So GIS that supports the spatial thinking, geospatial thinking, and now from this geospatial thinking, it goes to GI science for which help us for solution. So GIS offers multi-theme coverage through for with that geographical research, considering several various themes, right from topology to that livelihood. And here all themes are collected together, combined together, and to develop a conceptual framework that provides the ability to capture, store, and retrieve, and to analyze the spatial and non-spatial data sets. And ultimately, it helps us for realistic visualization and thematic representation. And how here I just want to mention that how NetMo works with different thematic aspects. You can visit the NetMo site, and it covers almost all perspective of geography, that is physical geography and its connection with that human geography. It works within the space, society, humanity, and natural processes. And in this perspective, in the physical perspective, covers the work of NATMO covers the physical, climate, geology, hydrology, pedology, biogeography, and ecology, and its connection, interconnectedness with that administrative perspective, demographic perspective, urban perspective, social perspective, really social perspective, of course, economic perspective, behavioral sciences and cultural perspective, historical perspective, and these are all interconnected with each other. Along with this, NATMO also works with the change detection pattern in the field of agriculture, water body, urban area. This all comes under perspective purview of NATMO. And that's some of the thematic area where education in the perspective education, especially the women education, where they are in different parts areas like higher education system, technological education, primary education, where is the gap, gross enrollment ratio, gender parity index. The detailed solution comes out from the work of NATMO. Then the similarly, as I told, the religious composition in different period of time, their religious dominance over the different districts level work, NATMO used to work. And recent past, during the COVID pandemic situation, that NATMO developed that dashboard which covers that location of hospitals and that rate of confirmed cases, active cases, recovered cases, diseased number of diseases, and that rate of recovery, rate of through the dashboard development, and along with the location of hospitals, district labs, blood bank, all this information has been developed in the district wise, and that large scale information has been detailed information was shared through its portal. Along with this, NATMO also works in the 3D perspective to develop for area solar rooftop solar panel in potential site analysis using then UV data, and that has been initiated, and some work has been done to identify that which area are most suitable and which are not suitable. So, along with this, the historical perspective also comes under the purview of NATMO, where here that first we what we do, we conceptualize that data's idea, that work we have to do. Then we develop a data structure and data visualization. And here we have shown in some of our publication how the succession of powers develop over the period of time, especially in case of Delhi. And so there was a complete changes over the period of time, which we can say that geographical research, there is a paradigm shift in geographical research where the problem oriented research comes now. We are giving the technology driven solution, and by integrating different disciplinary disciplines in this perspective, and with this we are using the augmented reality uh, to visualize and for problems analysis, and where in this process for solution process we are taking the help of stakeholders. Their participation is also most important, and out of this using this geospatial technology, this for that are used for multiple multimedia based application system. So this now the solution cannot be a closed door discussion. The integration of the technology as well as human is most important. This becomes now a part of that components of that work. I can cite some of the examples when in terms of when we work that disaster risk reduction. That if we see the world situation in Indonesia, we can see the students are involved in preparing that disaster management plan. In Maldives, the community they are participating, they are developing their management system. In Myanmar also, the local communities they prepare, they participate in the preparedness program. Even in Japan also, that community participation, you can cite the example how they work, what they're doing. That I'm showing. We prepare the detailed map of in order to develop anti-disaster plan. In India also, during filing, we can see that, especially in case of Odisha, they have developed, community has participated in the preparation planning purpose. So geospatial technology or geospatial thinking has been changed, and their area now it has come to the area of convergence. Now it has come to the age of convergence, where the science now interacting with the technology to strengthen its business perspective. So, a scientific investigation that helps to strengthen that with that informed decision, and the technical assistance that help to integrate the multiple scientific thoughts and to convert it in the business logic. And the scientific research are now empowered with the more and more assistance of technological part to get the optimal output and to reach and their interaction to reach to the local users to in the business line it has now confirmed and to achieve the economically viable output. So here that how this information are integrating. If we there that total system it has now formed architecture has been developed on this geo information infrastructure, where the information is a part, organization is a part, technology is a part, and human beings are the part. So this totally work as integrated system has been developed out of this part. But that if you have any information on that society community in case of vulnerability of disaster, if we work on that, so that space community and society, this all this information we need to develop in perspective of socio economic cultural information. And of course the demographic information is also is most important over here to identify the vulnerable group and to identify their what type of socio-economic situation is present over here, and to identify the potential group who can work as volunteer, and there by this process we can establish a self-sustainable mechanism to connect community in preparation of disaster management. And I can cite one example here in case of Odisha, how it is working. Here we can see the main focus is on that user interface, where the common people and the decision makers they will involved as that humanware and information, all information about that particular area, that is that will work as that information flow, where the society community scientific community will work as the organaware. So in this way this information system, this GII infrastructure system, it works where there is a potentiality if we work on this under this thinking. So here the inclusion of students and participation students as humanware is most important, where they can work as the common people, they can work as decision maker, they can work with for the society, for the organization, they can help in information flow to develop a user information system. So this way they can work as a part of in humanware, that with the help of common people and decision maker, with the scientific community they can work to develop a information system with that technological solution. So with this I end my discussion with a hope of better tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Greetings from Rituparna. At the outset, I thank you to the organizing committee for inviting me to deliberate a presentation uh, at the refresher course titled Geography, Geographers, and Geospatial Technologies Impacting Physical, Social, and Gendered Spaces 2021, which has been dedicated to late Professor R.B. Singh sir. I am very grateful for inviting me. The title of my today's presentation is Towards Just Transition and Sustainable Living. So let me share my screen before I continue my presentation. I'm sharing my screen. So as I have already said, the title of my presentation is Towards Just Transition and Sustainable Living. So in this lecture, I will deliver about the recently concluded COP26 Climate Summit, where India has pledged to accomplish carbon neutrality by 2070. I will discuss how will it be accomplished, what are the transitional plans through which India aims to achieve a net zero carbon footprint. Here also I will discuss the notion of what is meant by just transition. Then I will go to discuss how the notion of just transition gained momentum and was incorporated in the Paris Agreement, which was ratified by India on 2nd October 2016 and came into force on 4th November 2016. Then I will discuss the social, economic, and political challenges that will need to be met for just transitions to take place at different interconnected domains of the economy, charting for sustainable living. Now, before I start, I just give you an overview of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which starts from goal number 1, that is no poverty. Then goal number 2 is zero hunger. Then it goes, goal number 3 is about health and well-being. Then 4 is quality education. It goes up to 17, which is partnerships to accomplish the goals. Partnerships between the nations or private-public partnerships in order to accomplish the goals. Now the question is, what is sustainable development? So in order to go, we should, in order to actually come to a definition of sustainable goal, we need to move back into 1987 report, which was actually composed by Gro Harlem Brundtland and is commonly known as the Brundtland Report, where the definition of sustainable development was given very explicitly. So sustainable development is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Then the report further put it, humanity has the ability to make development sustainable to ensure that it meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. The concept of sustainable development does imply limits, not absolute limits, but limitations imposed by the present state of technology and social organization on environmental resources and by the ability of the biosphere to absorb the effects of human activities. By technology and social organization can be both managed and improved to make the way for a new era of economic growth. The Commission believes that widespread poverty is no longer inevitable. Poverty is not only an evil in itself, but sustainable development requires meeting the basic needs of all and extending to all the opportunity to fulfill their aspirations for a better life. A world in which poverty is endemic will always be prone to ecological and other catastrophes. This definition or an analysis of the report, which was true about 3 decades ago, is also true now. And if you read it, it doesn't need any explanation. It is self-explanatory. So let us move on to the next slide. So this sustainable development concept became an established notion, and became an established notion in the 2-week summit, which was held in June 1992 at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It is commonly known as the Earth Summit. It produced a 600-page Agenda 21 charting encyclopedic action plans among the stakeholders, global, national, and local organizations of the United Nations system, governments, and other significant groups, which was consequently adopted by more than 178 countries. So, in the wake of the Millennium Summit of the United Nations in 2000, followed by the adoption of the United Nations Millennium Declaration, 191 United Nations member states and about 22 international organizations pledged to accomplish the 8 Millennium Development Goals by 2015. There were 8 Millennium Development Goals which were adopted post 2000, and they had a very ambitious plans to achieve no poverty, no hunger by 2015, but it turned out to be flawed. But the question is that environment is, we need an environment, we need a pollution-free environment, and environment is where we all live, and development, we also need development at the same time, which we all want in attempting to improve our lot in our within our abode, and both development and environment are inseparable. They are the two facets of the they are the facets of a coin, two facets of the same coin. So we need environment as well as we need development, but how do we accomplish it in a sustainable way? So since in 2015, the 8 Millennium Development Goals turned out to be flawed. So the United Nations, and they framed the 17 sustainable goals, and these 17 sustainable goals can be achieved perhaps using the notion of just transition. So we'll come to a bit later on about the notion of just transition, but let us see how the notion of just transition is connected with the Sustainable Development Goals. It says that just transition notion connects to 14 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but it is explicitly connected with SDG 12, which is climate action, then SDG 10, reduced inequalities, SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth, and SDG 7, which is affordable and clean energy. Now, what is this just transition framework? What is this just transition, which is a framework for change? Just transition is a principle, a process, and practice. This is the definition given by Just Transition Alliance, and I have simply quoted it. So they have also gone to say that just transition is a vision-led, unifying and place-based set of principles, processes, and practices that build economic and political power to shift from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. That means our economy has to be extractive. From an extractive economy, we shift to a regenerative economy where it is relatively pollution free, or where we actually emit less carbon. This means approaching production and consumption cycles holistically and waste free. So the production and consumption cycles has to be holistical and waste free. Actually, in this sense, waste free is actually means it is telling about, how do we recycle things. The transition itself must be just and equitable, redressing past harms and creating new relationships of power for the future through reparations. If the process of transition is not just, the outcome will never be. Just transition describes both where we are going and how we get there. So now the question is how this notion of just transition surfaced. Actually, it was first coined, the phrase just transition was first coined by Brian Kohler, a Canadian trade union activist, in his article Sustainable Development, a Labor View, which was published in a trade union newsletter in 1998. He was speaking in favor in protection of those labor that faced hardships due to the closure of many sunset industries. Now the question is, what is sunset industries? The definition of sunset industries might vary from country to country, but the definition, but in UK, the oil and natural oil and natural gas refineries are can be termed as sunset industries. The sunset industries are actually those industries that actually faced glorious development and booming development and reached a peak, and now they are facing a decline and gradually a closure of those industries. So he was speaking for in favor of the labor who were engaged in those sunset industries in Canada. Gradually, the phrase took the shape of an environmental justice movement, especially in favor of those low-income labor communities, including those labor communities of color, engaged in hazardous jobs and other industrial practices. These movements, in contrast to mainstream environment movement, are embedded in civil rights movements demanding justice for laborers and working for a green economy. Now, geographers R. Heffron and D. Macaulay, they actually developed a legal geography diagram using the notion of legal geography diagram of the notion of just transition. So they have broken down the word just for, they use the just as an acronym. For example, J, they use it for justice, U for universal, then S for space, and T for time. So they say that justice takes the form of three forms of justice, which are distributional, that resources can be distributed; procedural, there is a process to work towards greener jobs and greener economy; and restorative, and means if we need to restore the economic process and go for decent jobs for laborers. Then U is universal. Universal takes the form of two universal forms of justice, which is recognition and cosmopolitanism. Then S has been used as a space, brings in location where are events happening in principle at local, national, and international levels. And T is time. Time brings into transition timelines such as 2030, 2050, 2080, and also speed of the energy transition, that is it happening fast enough? For example, if when we talk about time in India, this time in COP26, India has pledged that it would work for net zero carbon footprint by 2070. So they had their transitional time from going from coal energy to renewable forms of energy is 2070. I'm not sure whether we will live there or not, but at least India has taken a pledge which is at the moment looks achievable rather than making some false promises. Now, the just transition, as I've said, it gained momentum. So in the COP21 summit, which was held at Paris in 2015, and Paris Agreement was signed. So there, the notion of just transition was incorporated. As the Paris Agreement mentioned, taking into account the imperatives of a just transition of the workforce and the creation of decent work and quality jobs in accordance with nationally defined development priorities. Then simultaneously, the International Labour Organization also adopted the notion of just transition. A just transition for all towards an environmentally sustainable economy needs to be well managed and contribute to the goals of decent work for all, social inclusion, and eradication of poverty. Here I give you two examples of how some countries are adopting the notion of just transition, but the overall the concept is in a very nation state, and the concept is only being introduced, although it was developed, it was first coined in 1998. It is only, but since 2010 onwards, it has gained a momentum. So the first example, it's about the Polish government. As a result of coal restructuring in Poland, employment in the coal mining sector plummeted by 75% in 15 years. So Polish government worked with labor unions and developed a mining social package and special privileges for the mining communes. In Indonesia, President Joko Widodo recognized that the transport fuel subsidies were proving unsustainable for its national budget. So he worked on subsidy reform since 2014, aimed at better alternatives to promote development using cheaper fuel. He used this as an election weapon, mandating to remove the subsidies and replace them with more investments in infrastructure, transfers to villages, and poverty reduction programs. So these are just two examples of just transition approach. Now, in the recently concluded COP26 summit, which was held in Glasgow from 31st October to 12th November, PM Modi has made some pledges. So India has pledged to reduce its carbon emissions to net zero by 2070, which actually needs to be applauded, because it is means he has not made any false promises, but he has made some realistic promises. Of course, in doing so, it misses a key target of COP26 summit for countries committed to reaching that goal by 2050. China has pledged for net zero emissions by 2060. However, the US and the European Union, they stick to the target of net zero by 2050. CO2 emissions of India and other countries. India remains the fourth biggest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world after China, the US, and the European Union. However, it is the second largest populated country in the world, meaning its per capita emissions are much lower than many major economies of the world. In 2019, India emitted 1.9 tons of carbon dioxide per head of population. This is much lower when compared to the US, which emitted 15.5 tons, and Russia, which emitted 12.5 tons in 2019. Carbon dioxide emissions are not only from coal, but other sources. So this diagram shows the CO2 emissions by fuel type. You see the largest emission comes from coal, followed by oil, then natural gas, and other. Now, the question is how India is going to accomplish its net zero pledge. So India aims to accomplish 50% of its energy from renewable resources by 2030. 50% means 50% of its energy from renewable resources by 2030. So what are the renewable resources? It could be solar power, or it could be hydropower, or some other renewable resources. By the same year, to shrink the total projected carbon dioxide emissions by 1 billion tons. Modi ji announced 500 gigawatts of non-fossil electricity capacity by 2030 to achieve half of its energy from renewable resources by 2030. A decrease of carbon dioxide emissions by 1 billion tons and emissions intensity of the GDP by 45% of 2030. Just I have broken down the pledges of India, which was made in this COP26 summit. Now let us see the renewable energy production status of India. India's current capacity of renewable energy stands at 157 gigawatts. Its aim was to achieve 175 gigawatts by 2022. Of course, this excludes other hydroelectric and nuclear capacities. Generation of energy from renewable sources now stands at 39%. By 2030, it aims to go to 50%. So currently it is we are in 2021. However, the critics say that to actually decarbonize India's economy and limit the target of 1.5 degrees centigrade in order to keep in line with the Paris Agreement 2015, India would definitely need international support. So just since I said that just transition was incorporated in the Paris Agreement, actually Paris Agreement aimed to reduce the carbon emission of different countries to lower than 1.5 degree centigrade. But this graph shows, which has been actually extracted from BBC, this graph shows that India is going to miss its target of 175 gigawatts of renewable energy production by 2022. Now, the next question is, we have been talking about net zero, net zero. What is net zero? Let me revisit again. In COP26, countries have pledged to reduce its green gas emissions and accomplish the target of net zero by 2050 to achieve slow global warming. Net zero, by net zero, we mean not adding any more to the quantity of greenhouse gases already in the atmosphere. Greenhouse gases like CO2 are released when we burn oil, gas, and coal to be used at our homes, factories, and transport. Farming and landfill produces methane. Over 100 countries signed a pledge at COP26 to cut methane emissions by 30% by 2030. But our India has abstained from signing this pledge. These gases trigger global warming by trapping the energy from the sun. So this diagram shows the total emissions of carbon dioxide per year, total in megatons. If you see, India's position is fourth, as I have already said. First is China, then second is United States, then European Union, then fifth is Russia. Similarly, in the total per capita emissions of carbon dioxide in tons, China stands first, second is United States, then European nation, then India, then Russia. However, India is a coal-dependent country, and 40% of India's districts depend on coal. So this diagram shows the distribution of coal reserves in India. First is Jharkhand, then Orissa, then Chhattisgarh, West Bengal, Madhya Pradesh, Telangana, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Meghalaya, Assam, Nagaland, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh. In all these states, we have coal reserves, and there are coal-related jobs all over India. So So there are about 2696490 jobs related to coal in India, and this diagram shows the jobs in India. India, starting from Assam up till Tamil Nadu. In Jharkhand, the coal-related jobs are the highest. But there is some positive things that in order to go to means that India and China are leading the way in greening the globe. How they are planting actually trees and shrubs and growing agriculture. This is the diagram which has been taken from Earth Observatory of NASA. So they have claimed that in comparison to the other parts of the globe, India and China are leading the way in greening the globe. So so this is the bar diagram which shows how and to what extent India and China are leading lead in greening due to human activity. They are planting more trees, and while if you see the European Union and other countries, they are just fading away. But India is at least, India and China are at least, they are planting trees, but trees to which can actually absorb carbon dioxide and in that process reduce the emission of greenhouse gases. This is also another diagram showing how China and India lead the way in greening. So if you see, this area is far more greener when compared to the other parts of the world. But the thing is that how India is going to accomplish its pledge of attaining, net zero carbon footprint by 2070. What are its transitional plans? Because as I have said, that India is a coal-dependent country, and about more than 50% of coal dependent, and there are coal-related jobs where people are employed, and how they will be given some transitional ways. So India has to find some alternative ways, not only to reduce its carbon footprint, but provide the people dependent on coal with good packages, as if coal minings are being stopped or are being closed in future. It has to stop and give those people some alternative jobs and or give them some voluntary retirements or give them some good packages so that they can live a decent life. But the other transitional sources, it's not that India has not been thinking of. India has been working towards going green by by transitioning into solar power. So, and already in the states of Gujarat, Gujarat, Rajasthan, Karnataka, there are huge solar power parks which are huge solar power parks coming up, and these tables show the location of the parks in different states which are either growing or has been recently launched. For example, in Andhra Pradesh, these are 4 solar parks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 solar power parks of capacity 1500, 1000, 1500, and 160. In Arunachal Pradesh, it's Lohit Solar Park, which has a capacity of 20 MW. Then it's Gujarat. There are again 4 solar parks. Then Himachal Pradesh, then Kaja Solar Park, Jharkhand, floating solar park. Then Karnataka, Pavgada Solar Park. I think it is one of the largest solar parks. Then Kerala is Kasargod Solar Park. Then Madhya Pradesh, these are the solar parks: Rewa Solar Park, Mandasar Solar Park, Nimut Solar Park, Agar, Sajapur, Omkareshwar, floating solar park, Chattapur Solar Park, Bareti Solar Park. In Maharashtra, it's Sai Guru Solar Park, then Patoda Solar Park, and Doidasa Solar Park. Then Manipur, it is Bukki Solar Park. Then Meghalaya, it's solar park in Meghalaya. Then Bankai Solar Park in Mizoram. Then Orissa, it's solar park by NHPC. Then solar park by NHPC. Thereof, it was, the dates are given in bracket. Then Rajasthan, it's Bhadla 2 Solar Park, which was launched in 2014, and Bhadla Solar Park also launched simultaneously 2014. So these are very big solar parks. Then finally in Uttar Pradesh, then Bhadla 4 Solar Park, then Palaudi Pakaran Solar Park, Fatehgarh Phase Solar Park, Nok Solar Park, and in Uttar Pradesh it's solar park in UP. Then Jalawan Solar Park. So these solar park projects are gradually coming, but these are at a very nascent stage, and we are in a climate emergency or climate crisis, and we have huge challenges to reduce the carbon footprint and find some transitional ways so that we can move to renewable energies, and at the same time we need to save the jobs where most of the people are engaged in. So but the good news is that in this COP26 summit, India is a part of this Green Grid initiative, One Sun, One World, One Grid, One Sun declaration in COP26, where Green Grid initiative is backed by more than 80 countries, and the UK and India are planning to improve connections between the world's electricity power grids. It will allow areas to access renewable power to send it to areas with deficits, and Modi ji has described these grids as critical solutions to move into a clean and green future. The plan is part of broader attempt to speed up the rollout of affordable low carbon technology, covering more than 70% of the global economy. But this is just a start, and we need to be optimistic that we are going for a Green Grid initiative, and India is a part of it. But there is this picture which I show over here. It has been borrowed from a BBC website. So it is a picture of our Cochin airport, which has got 46,000 solar panels, and Cochin airport actually is self-sufficient in its energy, taking all its electricity produced from its own solar power panels. So it produces 50,000 to 60,000 units of electricity every day, taking care of its energy needs. And India, by its own geographical location, is actually blessed to have solar power energy, because India receives 300 days of sunshine. And this Cochin Airport has received the Champion of Art Prize in 2018, instituted by the United Nations. So, so it is one of the achievements among the many challenges that Cochin Airport itself is a self-sufficient airport in its energy needs. Indira Gandhi International Airport was one of the first airports to actually install solar power panels, but I'm not sure whether it is self-sufficient in its energy production or not, but definitely they are making some transitional plans so that low carbon energy is means they are making a transitional plans to go towards greener economy. And now most of us are middle class. So now the question is how households can go green. We should also make a transitional plan to go green. So in India, 28% of the total population of India are middle class. So of course, during the pandemic, its size has shrunk by about 30 million, but still we are better off than many. Now the question is how this 28% of the total population of India, which is approximately 300 million, 300 million people can go green. If amongst these 300 million people, there will be at least 120 million households. So I think we can go green by installing solar power panels into our houses, which will not only reduce the electricity bills of our homes, but also we can actually contribute, even if it is a drop in the deep ocean of crisis. We can contribute to reduce carbon emission by going green, which will be a drop in the deep ocean of crisis. And with this, I conclude, and I think I have been able to deliberate, and you have learned a little bit about the notion of just transition and sustainable living. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Before I begin my today's talk, I would like to express my gratitude towards Seema Parihar Madam and all the organizers of this refresher course. My name is Gaurav Sikka. I am Assistant Professor at the University Department of Geography, L.N. Mithila University in Darbhanga, Bihar. And today I will be sharing my experiences of outreach as an early career geographer. Seema Parihar ma'am has given me very interesting topic to discuss with all of you, because this is a normal routine. This is a very common practice of taking classroom regularly. We go to our classes regularly. We write papers, we do research, we publish in journals, books. So apart from all those activities, what different, what unique, what kind of outreach activities as an early career geographer we can do? So I will throw some light on my experiences of outreach as an early career geographer. I will share my experiences as on a leadership role in the IGU. Then I will also share my experiences as a faculty member in a university in Bihar. So let's begin with my today's talk. Beginning with my experiences with International Geographical Union Young and Early Career Geographers Task Force. You all must be aware that IGU is world's very popular and the largest galaxy of geographers. IGU has more than 40 commissions and task forces, out of which the task force which I'm associated is the Young and Early Career Geographer Task Force. It was launched on August 22nd, 2016 at the 33rd International Geographical Congress held in Beijing, China. Through a global application process, I was selected as a member of the steering committee of this task force. Subsequently, they elected me as the secretary and treasurer of this task force, the position which I am presently holding. Through this task force, we have been organizing a huge number of events for young scholars. Because the vision of this task force is to empowering and nurturing leaders in geography. This task force is for the PhD MPhil scholars, the postdocs, researchers, early career lecturers, assistant professors, and postgraduates. This is the steering committee members of my task force, where we have members from different parts of the world, from United Kingdom to Romania, Italy, Brazil, South Africa, Ecuador, USA, and I am here from India, representing India as the secretary and treasurer of this task force. And we have been, these are my strategic areas of this task force, and we have been organizing a large number of training and networking events at the IGU annual conferences, as well as online events. We have also been organizing Young Scholar Best Paper Award. We have also collaborated with different IGU commissions and similar young scholars commissions and associations in different parts of the country. We also set up an email list, listserv, so that young scholars can connect and they can have a job database, a mentor-mentee database. We also have social media presence and a website as well. The first event of this task force, jointly organized by me, was a masterclass event at Beijing, China, where Professor Jules Duglever from University of Amsterdam and the Vice President of the International Geographical Union was the key speaker. Professor Jarokos and Dr. Elaine were the other speakers of this masterclass, where this was a masterclass on finding funding and grants proposal writing. Then we have been organizing several activities in India as well. At the 10th IGU Thematic Conference organized by Osmania University at Hyderabad, we have made a debut of IGU YCG late Dr. Manju Singh Memorial Young Scientist Poster Award. And since then, late Dr. Manju Singh Memorial Best Paper Award is being going till date. And all credit of this award goes to Professor R.B. Singh sir. I would like to specially mention sir's name here. This refresher course is also dedicated to R.B. Singh sir. And Professor R.B. Singh sir has been generous enough to financially supporting this award since its inception. Dr. Manju Singh is the daughter of R.B. Singh sir and a PhD nanotechnology from USA. She left for Heavenly Abode in 2014. So in her memories, R.B. Singh sir has instituted this award with our task force. I would also like to take this opportunity to share the sorrow and grief of the entire generation of geographers, particularly the young geographers like me, who are in great sadness due to the sad demise of R.B. Singh sir. We have lost our guide, our mentor in R.B. Singh sir. So I pray for sirs, and I also commit that we will take all opportunities, we will take all efforts to further his vision, his ideas. So moving ahead, 11th IGU Commission seminar was held at Guwahati in India, where we continued with late Dr. Manju Singh Memorial Young Scientist Poster Award. Then IGU Regional Conference in August 2018 was organized at Quebec in Canada, where we have given the late Dr. Manju Singh Best Paper Award and the Student Registration Fee Waiver Awards as well. The series of awards continued, and in 12th IGU India Conference held at Panchkula, Haryana, we continued with this award. I have also organized an IGU YCG outreach program for Bihar geographers, which was graced by then Vice Chancellor of Patna University, Professor Rash Bihari Singh sir, and where a large number of participants, both postgraduate students, lecturers, professors of universities of Bihar, participated in this program and they get to know about IGU and IGU Task Force for Young and Early Career Geographers. The 13th IGU India International Conference was organized in October 2019 at Central University of Haryana, Mahendragarh, where this award was given to Dr. Rani Singh from Rajasthan University. Then you can see on the top, on the bottom, you can see a photograph where a meeting with representatives of Russian Geographical Society and Young Earth Scientist Network was organized at Mahendragarh. This was a great opportunity for young scholars, for PhD scholars participating in this conference to interact with young and early careers at the leadership positions. So Meng Wang was the president of the YES Network and Alexei Mestakov was the representative of Russian Geographical Society and a lecturer at Lomonosov Moscow State University. Apart from these events, I have jointly organized workshops on academic writing in Panchkula, Haryana, where we have invited Milton Milaras, a member of our steering committee and a lecturer at University of South Africa. He coached 30 enthusiastic participants through presentations and exercise on academic writing. Such kind of workshop is very important, is very useful for early career scholars, for PhD scholars in India. This is a glimpse of the 14th IGU India Conference organized by University of Burdwan in March 2020, just before the COVID outbreak happened and the COVID lockdown was announced in India. Late Dr. Manju Singh Best Paper Award is being given at this conference. This is a very important journal special issue focused on geospatiality and sustainable development goals, and which was an important publication platform for young and early career geographers. This special issue has come out in a Scopus Index journal and the official journal of Russian Geographical Society. Geography, Environment, Sustainability is the name of this journal. It is Q3 journal with impact factor around 1, and around 9 papers were shortlisted from a large number of papers. We received more than 50 papers for this special issue, and finally through peer review process, through the editorial process, 9 papers were published in this special issue. This is a call for our upcoming workshop of Asian Young Geographers, where we have collaborated with the Young Geographers group of Asian Geographical Association. I'm the co-chair of this workshop, and the call for this papers for this workshop is still open till 4th of December 2021. You will find more details about this workshop on our website. I will be sharing our website details very soon. We have also organized this IGU YCG IAYG Best Paper Award at the 34th International Geographical Congress at Istanbul, in which was a postponed IGU conference held in August 2021, where Patricia from Brazil won this award. So these awards, these Best Paper Awards, have been a motivational factors, have been a booster for young scholars, particularly from global South nations. This has been an important tool for, celebrating the research work of our fellow early career geographers. So these Best Paper Award has been a very successful event till date. In this slide, I have mentioned about the official website of my task force, igu.younggeographers.org, and the Facebook link of my IGU YCG page is also being shared here. Most importantly, we have an email list, as I mentioned before. This is the process of subscribing to our email list. And this email list is very useful because we share funding opportunities, PhD opportunities, scholarships, job opportunities, postdoc opportunities, publication opportunities, collaboration opportunities, all kind of information related to the young and early careers. So this is a very important domain for this particular section of scholars. So you should subscribe to this email list. You can also circulate in your own circles about this email list, about this task force. Now, till now I have shared my ideas, about my views, about my experiences with IGU. Now I will start my journey. Apart from IGU, what all activities I've been engaged in. I have traveled to Beijing, Moscow, Barcelona, Spain. You can also see me in one of the photo here on the right side, where I'm sitting on the Prime Meridian when I visited for a Development Studies Association conference at United Kingdom. I am also a member on the Executive Committee of Royal Geographical Society's Gender Geography Research Group. So in which we have been, doing online events, online statement on COVID-19 as a feminist issue, and a reader on gender geography is also being discussed. And I have received funding, external funding from different agencies, from University of Delhi, from International Geographical Union, from Government of UK, from University of Manchester, to travel abroad. So by all foreign visits have been funded till now. Recently, I have got funding for traveling to IGU Istanbul Congress. So in Bihar, I joined as an assistant professor in 2017, December. And since then, I've been actively working in developing, enriching the academic atmosphere, the campus programs of the universities. Here I'm involved in Raj Bhavan, Patna, blueprint of higher education in Bihar. On the top right corner, you can see we are finalizing the PG, postgraduate syllabus, choice-based credit syllabus of geography. The committee is headed by Professor Sudipta Adhikari. I also got an opportunity to be part of this syllabus committee. So this syllabus is being implemented through after the governor's assent on all the universities of Bihar from 2018 onwards. And I have been invited for talks in different parts of the state. Here I'm speaking at Krishi Vigyan Kendra at Nevada. I've been speaking at TIS program at Patna, at different universities. Then I am also a member on the committee for designing regulation, ordinance and syllabus for PhD programs at Center for Geographical Studies in Bihar. This is first of its kind of center, fully funded by a state government for supporting research and studies in geography. I am also been felicitated by Vice Chancellor as the member of the NAC committee of the university. I am also on the syllabus committee of my university, where I'm drafting some AEC papers of my CBCS syllabus of PG level. Then apart from that, this is another call for application for an Urban Studies Foundation funded early career workshop on geospatial analytics and urban planning. I am a national coordinator of this workshop. This workshop is being organized at Patna by Center for Geographical Studies, Aryabhatta Knowledge University. And travel support and funding support is available for young scholars from different parts of our country. So we look forward to your participation in this upcoming activities. I'm a project team member on a USF funded international seminar project. So these all are some of the outreach activities till date being organized by me. Apart from then, many other roles is being played by me as a scholar, as an early career geographer. So in nutshell, the relevance, the importance of this presentation is that the outreach activities are a very powerful tool, are a very important tool for developing your peer networks, for developing collaborations, for your outreach, for making your research visible, making your work visible in the entire academic circles. So this can be an important way of expressing your academic intellect to your peers, to your circles. So before I end my presentation, I again express my gratitude towards the organizer of this refresher course. And I thank all the participants of this refresher course, all the teachers participating in this refresher course for listening my lecture. I am thankful to all of you. Thank you so much.
Hello and welcome. Namaskar, I'm Dr. Karuna Shri from Department of Geography, Kirodimal College. I'm here to talk about something which we rarely talk about. I'm here to talk about mental health. So let's talk. I've been teaching in this institution, Kirodimal, since last many years. Since 2006, I'm teaching. And I have seen lots of ups and downs in students' life. I myself actively participate when students are in trouble, whether it's their studies, whether it's their personal problem. I used to take interest. And I realized that talking, asking, and making a person comfortable to share their problem really benefits them, really helps them. Now, in our institutions, mentor-mentee meetings are held. In such meetings, we encourage students to share their problems, to share their issues, not only academic, but their personal problems too. Many students have issues related to their relationships. They're young adults. They feel they have body image issues. They have nutritional issues. They have, you can say, eating disorders related to studies, concern related to career. So these are very vulnerable population. According to WHO, India has the maximum suicides happening between the age group of 13 to 35. This is the young population, and almost 50% of our population in India fall in this category. So this is a matter of concern to us. If such a big population is under depression or mental health, then we need to take into cognizance. We need to take situation into control. Earlier, we never used to talk about this. It was a taboo to talk about mental health. We never sought professional help. We never talked about it. And people used to shy away from the situation about mental health. We never created situation and spaces where we can talk about such issues in our institutes. But now the situation have changed. Now I've seen a marked change in people's attitude. Now it is no more concerned, no more considered as a taboo to share their mental health issues, to share their problems, their mental problems. All this has happened because we now talk about it. If a person is depressed, if a person has some issues, then he or she usually shy away from sharing it. And if we unnotice them, if we do not give them safe spaces to share their problems, then they may feel unnoticed, unwelcomed, unloved, and as a result, they may fall into deep depression, which can create furthermore problem. I've seen this happening with my personal problems, with my personal experiences. I've seen this happening to people near and dear to me, my students. But talking has always helped. Always. I have seen that if we create emotionally safe spaces, in our college, in our institutes, it really helps. Like we spend time and money, invest in our health, we take nutritious food, we go for a walk, we go to gym, we take professional help when it comes to our health, we go to best of hospitals and medical practitioners. Then why when it comes to mental health, we do not consider it as relevant? The problem lies because we do not have knowledge about it. We do not uh, know that it can be a big problem. I'm not saying that teachers should be counselors or psychologists. No, we cannot. We are not meant to be psychologists. We have psychologists, very good professional psychologists for them. I'm just saying that if we create spaces or atmosphere in our institutes where not only students but even teachers or other staff members, other employees of the college can come forward and share their issues with one another and do not fear to be judged or to be tabooed, then we can really help them. We can listen to them without being prejudiced. And if such hearing can benefit them, we can ask them to go to the counselor or medical practitioner. I've also seen that considering spending money on mental health is not priority for many people. Fair enough, not many people can afford, are well to do, and for them going to professional help for mental health can be a challenge, a issue. So it is duty of all the institutions to have in-house counselors in their colleges, in their institutes, where everyone, not only students but teachers and other employees, can go and share and can be counseled. If we consider these things as important, we can save many lives. We can save many people. It should be a priority to make our young population heard. It is our priority to make them productive for our country. It is important to create emotionally safe spaces in all institutions. And it is priority to encourage people to take professional help and not be judged and not be tabooed. On this note, that we create such spaces in our houses, in our homes, in our schools, in our colleges, and make not only physical healthy and mentally, emotionally healthy people surrounding us, then this world can be a much better place. On this note, I'll say thank you. Have a good day.